Hello everyone and welcome back to the Belgian Beer Brothers channel. Cedric here from Antwerp, and today, as promised, we are going to talk about a very festive beer. Literally and figuratively, because this is the Gouden Carolus or Golden Charles Indulgence Festiva. More on that later in this video, but let's start off with some info on this brewery, because this is another lovely family brewery. In fact, this is one of my favorite breweries of all times, and it's not even far from where I live. It's in Mechelen, which we already know from the Mechels Honingbier, and Mechelen used to have a bunch of breweries just like the rest of Flanders, but this is a brewery with a very long history. The brewery itself has a history of about 150 years, and this Festiva beer is in celebration of that 150th anniversary. But the actual story starts way earlier. Actually, one of the first written statements about this place as a brewery, but way before it was a commercial brewery, dates from 1471. So in the 14th and 15th century, this was already a beginnery, or a beginenhof, a cloister where the nuns took care of sick people. They had a krankenhuis, or a sick bay, and they actually brewed partially as medicine and partially to provide for themselves. Now, the first written statement that I found, and that is supported on the internet of course, was in 1471, when Charles the Bold of Karel the Stoute lifted taxes on the beer brewed here for the beguines and their officers and peers, and their patients of course. Just to say that 600 years ago or 550 years ago, they were already brewing in the building that the brewery is still in today. And actually, a few years ago now, they have renovated a lot and put in a new bottling line outside the city and stuff. But a few years back, when you walked the tiny streets around the brewery, you could look through the windows of these small residential places, and there you saw the stainless steel pipes and the bottling lines. So that was an awesome experience. Also because it's in the historic center of Mechelen, right near the water. Awesome place. If you ever have the chance to visit this place, do so. Have a bite, visit the brewery, and yeah, check out the city. So, in 1872, this site is bought by the Van Breedam family. They buy the entire estate. They sort of renovate a part of it, and they put in a, back then, state-of-the-art modern steam kettle. Now, in 1904, they changed the name from the company, back then called Boonaerts and Van Breedam, so two families, to Brewery Het Anker, or the Anker. A few years later, in 1912, Victor Van Breedam builds a maltery on site, and they use that to provide for themselves and the surrounding breweries, because, like I said, Mechelen had quite a lot of breweries. None of them are in existence today, but they have repurposed some sites as convention centers or hotels and stuff like that. Now, if you check the Wikipedia page for Het Anker, you will see that they wrote that this is the first maltery in Flanders. Unfortunately, that is very wrong, because 40 years before that, in 1875, Mouterij Dingemans right here in Stabroek started up. So, might have been the first concrete maltery. That's a whole different story. Now, the maltery part of the brewery is still intact today, no longer in use, but when you take the brewery tour, you will pass through the maltery in the attic. Then, unfortunately, as in most stories of this length, World War One hits, and the German occupants permitted one brewery per city to keep brewing. Unfortunately, this was not Het Anker in Mechelen. This was Chevalier Marin instead. For no reason whatsoever, this was a lottery, and Chevalier Marin got drawn. Now, Chevalier Marin also doesn't exist anymore these days. I believe they closed down in the 1980s. Anywho, so the red copper kettles from Het Anker got disassembled and melted down as resources for the Germans for bullets and stuff. In the 1920s, after the war, of course, many breweries don't come back from that. But Het Anker does. They had some reserves. And Charles van Bredem is appointed president of the Brewers Union. Now, in the 30s of that century, still many smaller breweries were struggling, and most of them just closed down. Nothing to do about that. Classic story. Now, this sounds like good news for Het Anker, but unfortunately, this is very bad news for the maltery, because, yeah, a maltery to supply only for yourself, not so good. A bit later on, World War II hits. Now, in World War II, Het Anker was a bit luckier than before, because there was no lottery. Breweries were permitted to keep brewing, but only light 0.8% beers. Luckily, they managed to do so, and that doesn't only mean that the brewery can keep brewing, but also that their employees can stay on and aren't shipped to Germany to work in the forces there. End of the war, 1945. Het Anker has survived, and luckily, because it's a beautiful site, and they immediately install a new brew house. So after 2 wars, they get the idea to install new copper kettles, which is quite rare in these days. And they decide to close down the maltery for good. It costs more money than it makes, so... And like I said, we have a few very large malteries. Even today, we have Malterie Dingemans in Stabroek, Boortmalt in Antwerp, and Malterie du Château in Wallonia. There's more than enough malt, so you don't have to make your own anymore. Fast forward to the 1960s. In 1960, the Emperor's beer is brewed for the first time, and we know this Emperor's beer as the Gouden Carolus, or the Golden Charles, which is also incorporated in the logo of Het Anker, because they have 2 logos. They have the crossed anchors, like the ship's anchors, but they also have Emperor Charles riding his horse. I know it's more of a beer logo than a brewery logo, but this is one of those breweries, yeah, that is actually named for the beer as well. So people do say the Gouden Carolus instead of Het Anker, just like they say Het Safe Bier instead of Antwerp Brewing Company. Anywho, again, fast forward 30 years, 1990. In 1990, the big seed is passed on to the chairman's son-in-law, Charles Leclerc. So no longer Van Bredem, that's his wife, but Charles has a certain vision and a certain ambition. And he takes this seriously. So as 5th generation family owner, he starts optimizing the brewing process. So he stays far away from the copper kettles, but he does optimize the cooling part and the fermentation units. And by doing so, he actually stabilizes the production process and is able to bring out more consistent quality, which is what we're all about these last few decades. So in the same year, he decides to open a 3-star hotel on site, so within the walls of the brewery. Now, fun fact, at the center of the brewery there is this hotel, and the buildings are placed in a T structure. So in one side of the T there's the hotel, in the other side of the T there's the administrative building, and Charles Leclerc lives there with his wife and children. Dedication. They actually start cooperating with some other breweries. So from 1991 to 93 they cooperated with Riva. Riva later on became part of Liefmans, which became part of Duvel Moordgat. But fun fact, Riva had Lucifer in their portfolio, a strong blonde beer, which was not interesting for Duvel Moordgat. So the past few decades, Het Anker had the license to brew Lucifer because Moordgat wasn't gonna do so. But a few years back they stopped making that as well. Unfortunately, because that was a great beer and I still have one in the fridge for a special occasion. And in 1995 through 97 they cooperated with John Martin. Now, John Martin had a special place in his heart for Antwerp, so in 97 they stopped cooperating. Het Anker went full on 100% on their own, and now 25 years later John Martin, or his son Anthony Martin, grandson, started cooperating with the Antwerp Brewing Company that I mentioned before. A decade later, so 2010, they start thinking about restarting the old family gin still in Blaasveld, not far from Mechelen, and they renovate the old farm. They repurpose the gin still as a whiskey pot still, and they start distilling a whiskey from the Gouden Carolus triple mash. Their first whiskey is introduced in 2013 and is an immediate hit. And later on, 2015, they even infused their beer with this. But more on that in a minute. Also in 2010, they opened a fantastic brasserie, as we say, a fantastic restaurant, where they incorporate the beers and the whiskies in their dishes. I can only say, great price point, fantastic food. Go there, have a bite. Even later on, 2021, I believe, they even opened a sort of a fast foodish concept at Malines in Mechelen, a new shopping center. They opened Mannenblusser City, named after their Pilsner beer, the Mannenblusser, which is also the nickname for an inhabitant of Mechelen. Cool myth, look that up. Mannenblusser, the guys who try to extinguish the moon. Last year, in 2022, they even opened an old church, an old chapel, repurposed to microbrewery and tavern. So, yeah, they're doing awesome things. Now, about this beer. This beer is part of the Indulgence series. Now, the Indulgence series is a series of annual limited editions since 2015. I just told you about their whiskey. Well, their very first Indulgence series was in 2015, and that was the Gouden Carolus whiskey infused. Back then it was the Cuvée van de Keizer, so their limited edition beer that they brew in February, of which I'm a fan, infused with whiskey. But later on they actually started making this in mass production, and it is an absolute hit, and it is their best seller until today. Fantastic beer, not to go out on, but yeah, very strong beer. That means that this is the 8th Indulgence beer. Now, over the years, from 2015 until now, they had the Cuvée Sauvage, which was a wild fermentation beer, the Botanique with some herbs infused, the Hopscure, which is a very, very bitter hoppy beer that I absolutely love and that they do have in their range right now, the Bingo Gold with some African influences. We will talk about that one as well. The Funken, that I can't remember currently, and the Anno 1521, which is based on German Rauchbier. Now, I do believe that I have 6 of those in my cellar, so we will be talking about all of them. I think I missed the Botanique. Anywho, and then we are today. I actually would have loved to have reviewed this beer last week before New Year's Eve. Why? Because this is the 2022 edition and this is the 150th anniversary celebratory beer. So, lovely pink label, lovely golden letters. Let's see what this says, because they are very, very, very limited with their info. All that I know is that this is a 9.3% ABV strong blonde with a very long fermentation period in the cellar, and it should be strong blonde, refreshing and fine pearly. That's all I found. Let's see. Strong blonde ale with a festive sparkle. 9.3% ABV, released in the summer of 2022, limited edition 2022, 5th generation family owner Charles Leclerc with his signature. Brewed in Belgium, re-fermented in France. Could this be a méthode champenoise? I don't know. Now, they do love experimenting with different techniques, with new techniques, so... Gouden Carolus Indulgence is a limited series of beers brewed every year with varying content. Festiva is the 8th taste expression released under this label, and the family history of Het Anker started exactly 150 years ago. We're celebrating this anniversary with an exceptional beer. The fine pearling and complex aromas that are created during the prolonged re-fermentation at cellar temperature lend this beer a refreshing, sparkling character. Let's raise a glass to the next 150 years of family brewing. And the way that these guys are going, I see that happening. Contents: barley and wheat. Extra strong beer. Yada yada yada. So actually they don't tell us anything more than I already knew. Also, I do have a whole collection of Gouden Carolus glasses, but I did borrow this one from my favorite bar. Why? Because I mainly have the chalices in every size and iteration possible, but a festive beer like this calls for a festive glass, and these are the new degustation glasses. Well, I say new, they're about 3-4 years old, I guess. But for a beer like this, again, a nice branded muselet. Ooh. It's already pushing out. That is indeed very aromatic. This is bottled in August from last year. I do see the fine pearlings here. Quite hoppy. quite fine as well. A lot of carbon dioxide. Yeah, there we go. Like I said, a lot of carbon dioxide. Look at that, it's like almost champagne, these pearls. It's a very, very, very clear, very golden yellow beer with perfectly white foam, large bubbles. Now I must say I did rinse the glass, I didn't degrease it professionally, so we might be losing our foam a bit quicker than usual, but in this case I wouldn't call that a problem. So it has the look of a high quality Pilsner. I do get some sweetness in there, so it's very hoppy, very bitter, quite sweet, but still a whole lot of carbon dioxide. I don't get the idea that there are herbs added or spices, so let's have a taste. Oh wow, this is at first glance, this is a very classic strong blonde. So I'm going out on a limb here, and first I'm gonna cap off this bottle because I don't want to lose all the aromas. I'm going out on a limb here and compare this slightly to the Lucifer that they've brewed for decades. Now of course they do have the know-how of their lovely, lovely triple. I would love to know more about the yeast strain that they've used. Because it is quite different. Now, the smell of this beer is quite neutral, and I would indeed compare this to some other classic strong blondes like a Duvel, like a Lucifer, maybe like Omer, but slightly sweeter and maybe a bit hoppier. I do think that their choice to use some wheat in there is a great choice, because the combination of a high alcohol content and the wheat and a lot of CO2 makes for a very heavy full mouthfeel. And I actually think that this is a very bold choice, but also a very nice choice to brew a very classic strong blonde ale as a festive beer, and don't go all crazy with 73 herbs and spices and specialty yeasts and all those things. So yeah, I think they made a very bold but very nice choice. On the other hand, I would not see them put this on the market in their regular range, because I think they actually discontinued Lucifer because they don't want to compete with Duvel, with Omer, with many of those other classic brands. But I do like the idea that they brought this out for a one-time offer. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, this is a great choice. Now, on to the verdict, because yeah, I know I do forget quite often. For me, this is an instant classic. This is a great take on a classic style. It's somewhere between a strong blonde and a triple for me, and I do mean the right kind of triple, not the sweet, geeky stuff. So yeah, I'd call this a 375 in Untapped, maybe even a 4. We'll see. And yeah, another job well done by Het Anker. Now I do have a complete closet full of Anker beers, so we are going to talk about this brewery a bit more often, and you will see that it actually is one of my favorites, and for a reason. So that being said, thank you guys so much for watching again. Thanks for tuning in every time I post these things. As usual, if you have any remarks, comments, questions, leave them down below. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you want to share experiences or opinions, please do so. And if you want to see more, subscribe and hit the bell icon. And I will see you guys again tomorrow, day after, I don't know. Actually, this is where my planning ended, so back to before. Cheers, you guys, enjoy, and see you next time.